This week in the boardroom, brought to you by corporate board member and host NYSE Euronext, along with governance knowledge partners, the Center for Audit Quality, and Grant Thornton, and contributing partners, National Investor Relations Institute, and the Society of Corporate Secretaries and Governance Professionals.
Welcome to this edition of This Week in the Boardroom. I'm TK Kerstetter with corporate board member, and we have a very timely topic today. We're going to be taking a look at the upcoming proxy season, or actually we're in the season, but we're coming up to the large array of annual meetings, which is when all of our results are reported. And I've asked in two experts today so that we could talk about those topics, and I'd like to introduce my guests for today. First to my immediate left is Paul Conn. He's the president of the Global Capital Markets for Computershare. And Computershare is a shareholder board and management engagement services firm, which includes trust services, governance services, technology services, so a very broad shareholder and management engagement group that has done a lot of good work in this space. And to his left is David Drake, who's the president of Jorgensen. Jorgensen is a well-known proxy solicitation firm and is one of the key members of the Computershare family. You guys were acquired and part of the firm, I believe, in 2003.
That's right.
So welcome, both of you. And we've got a great topic. As you guys know, you're right in the fray. So let's just start with that. My first question for you is, so outside of the say on pay, which has certainly become an annual process for all of the companies, as we look into the season of what's going on right now, what are the other issues or proposals that are sort of surfacing? And David, I'll start with you.
Sure. Well, I think the key issues outside of say on pay, and certainly say on pay has really dominated the headlines and the attention of many companies over the last 2 or 3 years. But some of the other issues that will be on the ballot, if you will, that I think are going to be grabbing our attention. First and foremost, I think, is the issue of proxy access. We're expecting a greater number of investors to submit proposals, and somehow already have submitted to companies proposals seeking proxy access, which means giving shareholders who qualify the ability to nominate directors and have those candidates appear on management's ballot rather than having to file their own proxy statement and wage a proxy contest against the company. Last year there were 20 to 25 of those proposals filed. 2 of them passed, and it seems like the winning formula for those proposals passing is a proposal to allow shareholders who own at least 3% for 3 continuous years of a company's outstanding shares to submit a nomination or a limited number of nominations for the company's board. And the issue there that I think is so important for boards is that this creates an easier path for shareholders to replace directors for directors and boards where they believe that the company is underperforming and needs either more skills on the board or just additional oversight on behalf of shareholders. So I think that'll be one key issue that we'll see. A second issue will be, it's not a new issue, but I think we'll see more proposals on this year, will be the issue of having an independent chairman of the board. In other words, separating the positions of chairman and CEO. It's something that we see as a regular structure on boards in other countries, but there's still been a resistance to that in the United States. Most CEOs sort of feel like they need to have both the chairman and the CEO position to properly guide the company. Investors, to some extent, disagree, and we'll see a number of proposals on that issue this season.
Yeah, in my travels, I would tell you that boards are looking for the proper opportunity to do that, meaning they're not going to strip somebody of the title that's sitting there currently. But I think we're seeing a lot given serious consideration to that when they have to replace a CEO, and they're splitting the titles then and getting an independent chair. And the private ordering, of the proxy access, I agree with you. I think we're going to see more of that. It'll be interesting to see if this year is a little more vibrant than in past years. The other thing that Say on Pay has done is it's sort of given a guideline or a tool for shareholders to sort of, if they aren't happy, to actually withhold votes. In other words, create a situation where, even if they can't elect somebody, they can maybe get rid of somebody on that side. And that has had to have changed the way you guys are viewed today, because all of a sudden, when you look at Proxy 452, which takes away the ability for the brokerage firms to vote their discretionary shares on elections, and you look at majority voting, which has significantly penetrated the Fortune 500 part of there, all of a sudden it's a new world, and you got to get the vote out. So tell me about how that's changed the proxy solicitation world.
Well, you're right. It has changed our business. I would say if there's a good piece of news about Say on Pay is that to some extent it's actually served as a shield to corporate directors from withhold votes. In other words, a lot of large institutional investors, if they're unhappy with the company's pay program, they'll express their dissatisfaction by voting against the advisory vote on executive compensation and not vote necessarily against, let's say, the compensation committee directors or other directors of the board. So really how this this new advisory vote has changed our business is it has sort of put us in an advisory role on the issue of executive compensation to companies. And it's not to say that we're advising companies on what the appropriate level of pay is, but what we are doing is educating our clients and consulting with them more about best practices in compensation structure, also educating them on what the guidelines are of these various institutional investors and proxy advisory firms. So it really has sort of opened up sort of a whole array of consulting needs from our clients.
I think just really to follow that point up on Rule 452 and the changes there was a lot of discussion in the industry about what the impact of companies losing the discretionary vote from brokers. And I think in practice we've not really seen such a large impact. I mean, we ourselves thought there would be a more significant impact on vote levels, but I think it really goes to the counterbalancing force is companies are stepping up and looking to get the vote out, and we're obviously helping them both from a proxy solicitation perspective, but also from a broader base of services to be better able to communicate with their investors and to get votes back, and technology is a key part of that.
Yeah.
So it wasn't as impactful as we initially expected, and we weren't alone in that. There were many people who thought that it would be a very significant impact.
Well, we've certainly talked on the show about how voting would be impacted relative to those changes, and again, we'll just have to see each year as
absolutely
on what happens. Let me ask you, we can't talk about this subject without bringing up proxy advisors and the frustration that exists within the ranks of the boardrooms of corporate America. I'm very curious on your guys' perspective from that, because you have to reach out to the proxy advisory firms. David, you have history of actually being involved with the other side on that. Notice I didn't say dark side, I just said other side. But so I'm curious on the frustration that they feel that they can't communicate or can't get changes done. And from your perspective, is it as bad as the directors sort of paint the picture that it is?
Well, why don't I start with that one and let David follow up? I think it's absolutely right to say it's a very emotive topic. There's a real perception that the proxy advisors have very, very significant influence over the business of companies and their ballots and the business that they're trying to get done. So we hear that, the influence question a lot. I think the other thing is true, investors, when they're not comfortable with the direction in which a company is going, are perhaps less likely to sell now and more likely to engage in a dialogue with the company or a battle with the company to try and influence its direction. So, that has an influence as well. I think the other guiding factor is it's a very concentrated market. So there are a very small group of proxy advisors communicating and advising the institutional community, and I think that's a dynamic as well. The other dynamic is that some of these advisors are, in addition to helping institutions with determining how they should vote on particular management resolutions, are also selling services to issuers as to what they need to do to get there. So I honestly think it is, it's very emotive. I think it gets blown out of proportion a little bit, because at the end of the day, institutions have a very, very wide range of investments, and it's quite clear that they do need some assistance, definitely on the mechanical aspects of what are all the meetings that are going on, what are the proposals, what are the industry trends, etc., etc. So I think there's definitely two sides to this particular story, but perhaps I'd just let David follow up and comment on that, if that's okay with you.
Well, I agree with Paul's comments. From my perspective at Georgeson, what we are constantly advising companies is that while we understand the frustration, all hope is not lost. There, I think, is a good development in that a lot of institutional investors are striving to become more independent and engage with companies and make clear to them that their votes are not entirely determined by an outside advisor. Firms like BlackRock and Vanguard and State Street have all reached out to the corporate world and actually encourage them to engage. And we have more clients that are doing this, not only during the proxy cycle, but outside of proxy season, whether that be in the fall or in the early winter months before the proxy cycle begins. And we have a lot of clients who are going through that process right now, speaking with their institutional investors about compensation issues, about their governance profile in general. So we've been spending more time with companies, encouraging them to basically get involved in year-round engagement and not just leave the proxy voting decision to the proxy advisory firms.
Well, the year-round engagement is something we've been talking about on the show for quite a bit, and I think that's maybe, last year we said it was a year of shareholder communication, so we felt that it really started to change last year, and this year is just a continuation of the same. I think
we'll see more of that.
So we've also talked on the show about what the SEC's interest in this proxy plumbing has been. So I'm curious real quick on your views relative to the SEC's, where it stands, because we've all been waiting after a boatload of comment letters coming in about what the SEC is going to do about shareholder communication and proxy mechanics.
Well, I wish I knew the answer to that question. It's one that many of us are waiting for some further direction on. But I think what the SEC did was to put this concept paper out in 2010, seeking lots of feedback on many, many different aspects of the proxy system, including the advisors. I think they might look at the advisors first and push aspects of the review of the proxy plumbing and the mechanics out to a later point. There's been some significant management changes at the SEC, and so we're waiting for new management to be in situ to understand what their priorities are. There are a lot of competing priorities with Dodd-Frank, the Jobs Act is going through. So there are a number of things that I think are causing this to slip down the agenda. But it is a very, very important issue. The more the underlying system can be modernized, the more companies will be able to understand who their shareholders are, the more effectively they'll be able to communicate with them, the more often they'll be able to communicate with them. So I think it is a policy issue, even though some of the technical issues are kind of quite dull and mundane and don't grasp everyone's attention.
Well, everybody has been waiting, and I have a feeling that they're going to be waiting.
I think that's true. I think we're in for a much longer wait, but we'll see.
Well, we're running out of time, but there's a question I always like to ask, and I'll direct this to you, David, since you interact with boards, probably every day. And what I'm curious about is your views on what you've seen that has sort of impressed you in the way the boards have changed in response to all this engagement stuff. And then where do you think is the area that they could improve the most?
Well, I think clearly the area where they've improved the most and what's impressed me is the actual willingness of directors to get directly involved in that engagement process. Most shareholders are used to hearing from the Director of Investor Relations or the CFO or perhaps the Corporate Secretary. But we've seen in the last year more chairmen of comp committees getting involved in the say on pay discussion. If there are issues regarding specific directors or other governance issues, we've been seeing members of the Governance and Nominating Committee get involved in this conversation. It's been especially effective with the comp committee directors getting involved. The last person that shareholders want to hear from about executive pay is the executives themselves. And if the board can get actively involved and talk about the process and what they try to achieve in their pay structure, that goes a long way to getting support of institutional investors, and I think we'll see more of that in the next couple of years.
So 30 seconds, what do they need to improve on?
Well, perhaps they need to improve on their understanding of the institutional investor guidelines. What are they looking for in terms of pay for performance and linking the two together? But just also understanding their views and thoughts on corporate governance in general, and how their specific corporate governance structure is viewed by those investors, so that when they go out, they can be effective in their outreach.
Well, gentlemen, I certainly wish you luck. You're in the process right now of collecting votes and getting that done. I suspect that you may represent corporate and also shareholders in different things, so you have interests on both sides on there, but getting the vote out is always good. So that's the process. I certainly wish you luck with the season, and we'll have to watch after all the annual meetings actually what the final results were. So
Absolutely.
Thank you for joining us.
Thank you.
And that will conclude this edition of This Week in the Boardroom. We hope you enjoyed the show. We'll be back again next week to take a look at another critical topic that'll help you be a better board member or committee member, and we'll see you then.
Join us again next week for This Week in the Boardroom, brought to you by Corporate Board Member and host NYSE Euronext, along with Governance Knowledge Partners, the Center for Audit Quality, and Grant Thornton, and contributing partners, National Investor Relations Institute, and the Society of Corporate Secretaries and Governance Professionals.